Retrain your nervous system. Your function will return. I believe in you. See you in the next video.
David is 42 years old, appears healthy on paper with normal medical test results, stays reasonably active with regular exercise, maintains a good relationship, and still feels genuinely attracted to his partner, both emotionally and physically. Yet, despite all of these positive factors that should support healthy sexual function, his sexual performance has become frustratingly and terrifyingly unreliable and unpredictable. Sometimes everything works perfectly, just like it used to. His erections are firm and reliable, arousal feels natural and effortless, the entire sexual experience unfolds smoothly and satisfyingly. But other times, seemingly without warning or clear reason, nothing happens at all. His body doesn't respond to arousal the way it should, erections don't appear or don't last, and the entire experience becomes an anxious struggle instead of pleasure and connection. And here's the truly maddening, destructive part of David's situation. The more desperately he tries to force it to work, the more he focuses his conscious attention on making his body perform, the more he monitors and evaluates his physical response moment by moment, the worse the entire problem becomes. It's like quicksand. The harder he struggles, the deeper he sinks. David's physical body isn't fundamentally broken or damaged. His cardiovascular system works. His hormones are within acceptable ranges. His nervous system is intact. But his mind, his psychological state, his thought patterns and emotional associations have quietly taken control of his sexual response in the absolute worst possible way, creating a pattern of dysfunction that feeds on itself and grows stronger with each failure. The real enemy destroying David's sexual performance isn't low testosterone levels, though that's what many men immediately assume and fear. It isn't his age, though he worries constantly that at 42 he somehow passed his sexual prime. It isn't lack of desire or attraction, because he genuinely wants to be sexual with his partner and feels attracted to her. The real enemy is far more insidious and hidden. It's the invisible mental block, the psychological pattern, the learned fear response that has developed in his mind and now automatically shuts down his sexual performance before it can even begin. This mental block operates largely outside his conscious awareness and control, triggering anxiety and physical shutdown faster than he can consciously intervene, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of anticipatory fear, failed performance, increased anxiety, and further failure that becomes harder and harder to break with each repetition. Hello, and welcome to another video here on the channel. If you're new here, I create evidence-based, practical, deeply honest content specifically about men's health, sexual function, psychology, relationships, and performing at your absolute best in all areas of life.
Please make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos that could fundamentally transform your understanding of how your body and mind work together. And if what we discussed today resonates powerfully with you, if it helps you finally understand why your sexual performance has become unreliable despite being physically healthy, if it gives you a clear path to breaking the mental blocks that are sabotaging your sexual function, please take a moment to leave a like on this video to help other struggling men discover this potentially life-changing information that could save their confidence, their relationships, and their sense of masculine identity. Today, we're going to reveal something absolutely critical that almost no one talks about openly and honestly, something that could revolutionize your understanding of male sexual dysfunction. We're going to explore why male sexual performance is fundamentally and deeply controlled by the brain and the nervous system, not just by physical factors like blood flow, hormones, and cardiovascular health. Those physical factors certainly matter and play important supporting roles, but the primary control center, the master switch that determines whether arousal and erection happen or don't happen, is located between your ears in your brain and throughout your nervous system, not between your legs. When your mind becomes overloaded with stress, pressure, fear of failure, and constant anxious self-monitoring during sexual situations, it automatically and involuntarily activates what we call survival mode or the stress response. In that activated threatened state, your nervous system's priorities shift dramatically and immediately. It prioritizes protection, safety, and immediate survival over everything else, including pleasure, connection, and reproduction. Blood flow patterns change throughout your body, redirecting away from non-essential functions like digestion and sexual response toward essential survival systems. Arousal signals from your brain to your genitals weaken or disappear entirely, and erections become inconsistent, unreliable, or vanish altogether, no matter how much you consciously want them or try to force them to happen. Most men are never told this fundamental truth about how sexual function actually works. Nobody explains to them that their brain and nervous system are the primary control systems, not their genitals. Instead, they naturally and understandably blame their masculinity, questioning whether they're man enough or whether something essential about their identity has been lost. They blame their partner, wondering if maybe they're no longer attracted or if the relationship has somehow died. They blame their hormones, immediately assuming low testosterone must be the culprit. They blame their age, accepting declining sexual function as inevitable.
When the mental block is properly identified and removed through the right approach, when the nervous system is retrained to associate sexual situations with safety rather than threat, the body automatically remembers what to do. Erections become reliable and consistent again. Desire and arousal feel natural and spontaneous. Confidence returns, not through forced effort, but as a natural consequence of restored function. The anxiety dissolves because it no longer has any basis in reality. Let's start by understanding at a fundamental level why sexual performance is so deeply controlled by the brain and nervous system rather than being a simple mechanical, physical process. Many men mistakenly think of erections and sexual function as purely physical plumbing, similar to any other bodily function. They assume that if the blood vessels work, if the hormones are adequate, if the physical equipment is intact, then sexual function should be automatic and reliable, regardless of mental state. But this understanding is completely wrong and leads to enormous confusion and frustration. Sexual response in humans is not a simple mechanical reflex. It's a complex, sophisticated process that requires precise coordination between your brain, your nervous system, your hormones, your blood vessels, and your psychological and emotional state, all working together seamlessly. And the brain is unequivocally the master control center of this entire system. Here's how it actually works. Sexual arousal begins in your brain when you perceive something sexually relevant, whether that's visual stimuli, physical touch, fantasy, emotional connection, or some combination of factors. Your brain evaluates this input and determines whether conditions are appropriate and safe for sexual response. This evaluation happens largely unconsciously and automatically, drawing on your current physiological state, your emotional state, your sense of safety, your past experiences and associations, and countless other factors. If your brain determines that conditions are favorable, that you're safe and relaxed, that arousal is appropriate, it sends signals down through your spinal cord and out through the parasympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system to your genitals. These nerve signals trigger a cascade of events. Blood vessels in the penis dilate and expand. Blood flow increases dramatically. The smooth muscle tissue relaxes, allowing blood to fill the erectile chambers, and mechanical valves close to trap blood inside, creating rigidity and firmness. This entire process requires activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, often called the rest and digest system, which operates when you feel safe, relaxed, and at ease. However, if your brain detects threat, pressure, stress, or danger, whether that danger is physical or psychological, real or imagined, it activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight stress response.
When this system activates, everything changes immediately. Blood vessels constrict rather than dilate. Blood flow is redirected away from non-essential functions, including sexual response, toward large muscles needed for fighting or running. The smooth muscle in the penis contracts rather than relaxes. Stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol flood your system, and sexual arousal becomes physiologically impossible, regardless of how much you consciously want it or how hard you try to force it. You cannot consciously override this system. You cannot think or willpower your way into an erection when your nervous system has activated the stress response. The systems are incompatible. You must be in parasympathetic mode for arousal to occur, and the moment you activate sympathetic stress response, sexual function shuts down automatically and immediately. This is where David and millions of men like him get trapped in the vicious cycle. Past failures, whether one dramatic incident or accumulated smaller difficulties, create anxiety and fear about future sexual situations. This anxiety is essentially a learned fear response. The brain has learned to associate sexual situations with potential failure, embarrassment, shame, and threat to identity and relationship. So the next time a sexual opportunity arises, even before conscious thought, the brain detects the situation, recalls the anxiety pattern, and activates the stress response protectively, as if preparing for a threat. This stress activation immediately shuts down the very sexual function the man desperately wants to work, creating another failure, which reinforces and strengthens the anxiety pattern, which makes the next situation even more anxiety-provoking, which creates more stress activation, which causes more failure, round and round in an accelerating downward spiral that feels impossible to escape. And here's the truly insidious part. The more David tries consciously to make it work, the more he focuses his attention on monitoring his physical response, checking whether he's getting an erection, evaluating whether it's firm enough, worrying whether it will last, the more he activates the stress response and guarantees failure. This phenomenon is called spectatoring in sex therapy terminology. Instead of being present and immersed in the sensory and emotional experience, he becomes a spectator, watching and judging his own performance. This vigilant self-monitoring is inherently stressful and anxiety-provoking. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, and it makes arousal impossible. The harder he tries, the worse it gets. Effort and force are completely counterproductive because they increase pressure and stress, which are the very things preventing arousal in the first place. Most men experiencing this don't understand what's happening to them.
They interpret inconsistent sexual performance as evidence that something is fundamentally broken in their body, or that they're losing their masculinity, or that they're no longer attracted to their partner. They desperately search for physical explanations and solutions. They immediately want to get their testosterone tested, assuming it must be low. They consider whether they need erectile dysfunction medications. They wonder if they have some undiagnosed medical condition. And while physical factors should certainly be evaluated and addressed if present, in cases like David's, where medical tests come back normal, where the man is generally healthy, where sexual function is inconsistent rather than completely absent, meaning it sometimes works perfectly and sometimes doesn't, the problem is almost always primarily psychological and neurological rather than primarily physical. The body is capable of functioning correctly, but the mind is blocking and preventing it from doing so. Now, let's examine specific mental and psychological factors that create and maintain this blocking pattern, so you can identify which ones are operating in your specific situation. The first major factor is performance anxiety itself, which is both a cause and an effect of sexual dysfunction in a self-perpetuating cycle. Performance anxiety is the fear and worry about your ability to perform sexually, to achieve and maintain an erection, to satisfy your partner, to demonstrate your masculinity and adequacy. This anxiety typically develops after one or more experiences of sexual difficulty or failure. That initial failure might have been caused by temporary factors like excessive alcohol, extreme stress or fatigue, distraction, medication side effects, or even just random physiological variation. But the experience creates a powerful memory and emotional association. The next time a sexual opportunity arises, you remember the previous failure. You worry it might happen again, and that worry itself activates stress responses that make failure more likely. After several repetitions, the anxiety becomes automatic and anticipatory. You're anxious before anything even happens. Your nervous system is already activated and stressed, and failure becomes almost inevitable, not because anything is wrong with your body, but because your mind has created conditions incompatible with arousal. The second major factor is chronic stress and elevated baseline arousal of your nervous system from non-sectional sources. If you're dealing with significant work stress, financial pressure, relationship conflict, health worries, family responsibilities, or other major life stressors, your nervous system is likely operating in a chronically elevated state of activation, even when you're not consciously aware of feeling stressed. Your baseline cortisol levels are elevated. Your sympathetic nervous system is more easily triggered. Your capacity to relax and shift into parasympathetic mode is impaired.
In this chronically stressed state, sexual arousal requires much more stimulation and feels much more difficult to achieve, and any additional pressure or anxiety around sexual performance easily tips you over into full stress response and sexual shutdown. The stress doesn't even have to be about sex. General life stress depletes your capacity for sexual response because the two systems compete for the same limited nervous system resources. The third major factor is negative thought patterns and cognitive distortions around sexuality and sexual performance. Many men carry deeply ingrained beliefs that are profoundly unhelpful and actively interfere with sexual function. Beliefs like, real men are always ready for sex and never have difficulties. If I can't perform, I'm not a real man. My worth and masculinity are defined by my sexual performance. If I fail sexually, my partner will lose respect for me or leave me. Any difficulty is catastrophic and means something terrible is wrong. These beliefs are not accurate or helpful, but they feel true, and they create enormous pressure that activates stress responses.
Additionally, during sexual situations, anxious men often engage in negative self-talk and catastrophic thinking. It's not working. I'm failing again. She's going to be disappointed. This is terrible. I'll never be able to perform. This internal commentary maintains stress and anxiety and prevents relaxation and arousal. The fourth major factor is attentional focus and spectatoring that we mentioned earlier. Healthy sexual response requires being present in your body, attending to pleasurable sensations, staying connected with your partner, and allowing arousal to build naturally without conscious monitoring or effort. But anxious men do the exact opposite. They split their attention, part of them trying to engage in the sexual experience, while another part constantly monitors and evaluates their physical response. This divided attention prevents full immersion in the experience, maintains self-consciousness and anxiety, and makes natural arousal impossible. The fifth major factor is pressure around frequency and initiation. Many men feel they should always want sex, should always be ready, should always be the one initiating, should never turn down an opportunity. This creates enormous pressure that paradoxically suppresses natural spontaneous desire. When sex feels like a performance obligation rather than a desired pleasurable activity, when every potential opportunity feels like a test of your adequacy, your nervous system interprets this as stress and threat rather than safety and pleasure, and sexual response becomes difficult or impossible. The sixth major factor is relationship dynamics and communication patterns.
If there's unaddressed tension, conflict, resentment, or emotional distance in the relationship, sexual function often suffers, even if both partners still care about each other. If you and your partner aren't talking openly about what's happening, if you're both pretending everything is fine while anxiety builds, if she's confused or hurt by your apparent lack of interest, if you're withdrawing to avoid situations where you might fail, these dynamics create stress and disconnection that further impair sexual response. Sexual dysfunction often starts as a physical or psychological problem in one person, but quickly becomes a relationship issue affecting both partners and creating dynamics that perpetuate the problem. Now here's the crucial insight that changes everything. All of these mental blocks and psychological factors are learned patterns, not permanent conditions. Your nervous system has learned to respond to sexual situations with stress and shutdown rather than with relaxation and arousal. But learned responses can be unlearned and replaced with healthier patterns. The brain and nervous system are extraordinarily plastic and adaptable throughout life. The same neural mechanisms that created the dysfunctional pattern can be used to create a functional, healthy pattern. But this requires the right approach, not the wrong approach that most men instinctively try. The wrong approach is trying harder, using more willpower, forcing yourself to perform, focusing intensely on making your body respond. This approach fails because it increases pressure, activates stress responses, and reinforces the problem. The right approach is almost the opposite, reducing pressure, creating safety, shifting focus away from performance toward pleasure and connection, retraining your nervous system gradually through positive experiences, and allowing function to return naturally as a consequence of changed conditions rather than through direct effort. Let me give you a comprehensive plan for removing the mental blocks and restoring natural, reliable sexual function. Step 1 is accepting and understanding that your sexual dysfunction is primarily a learned psychological pattern rather than physical damage or permanent failure. This acceptance actually reduces anxiety because it means you're not broken, you're not permanently damaged, you haven't lost your masculinity. You've simply learned an unhelpful response pattern that can be unlearned. Read about the psychology and neuroscience of sexual response so you understand what's happening in your body. Knowledge itself reduces anxiety. Step 2 is eliminating or dramatically reducing pressure around sexual performance. This is absolutely critical and often requires explicit discussion with your partner. For a period of time, perhaps 2 to 4 weeks, take penetrative intercourse and successful performance completely off the table. This isn't giving up, it's strategic de-escalation to break the anxiety cycle.
Agree with your partner that during this period, you'll focus only on pleasurable connection, touch, intimacy, without any goal of erections or intercourse. This removes the performance pressure that activates stress responses and allows your nervous system to begin relaxing during sexual situations. Step 3 is practicing sensate focus exercises, which are the gold standard therapeutic approach for sexual performance anxiety. Sensate focus involves structured touching exercises with your partner that gradually progress through stages, always focusing on pleasure and sensation rather than arousal or performance. You start with non-sexual touch, just exploring each other's bodies with the explicit agreement that genital touch and sexual arousal are not the goals. This allows you to be present in your body, attend to pleasurable sensations, and relax without performance pressure. Gradually, over multiple sessions, you progress to including genital touch, but still without any goal of arousal or intercourse, just exploration and pleasure. Eventually, arousal begins happening spontaneously without effort because you're relaxed and focused on sensation. When erections occur naturally without pressure, you let them come and go without trying to maintain them or use them for anything. This retrains your nervous system that sexual situations are safe and pleasurable, not stressful tests. Step 4 is working with cognitive restructuring to identify and change unhelpful thought patterns and beliefs about sex and masculinity. When you notice anxious or negative thoughts, consciously challenge and replace them with more accurate, helpful thoughts. Instead of, "I'm failing, this is terrible," try, "My body needs time to relax, there's no emergency, I can focus on pleasure." Instead of, "I must perform," or "I'm not a man," recognize, "My worth isn't determined by erections. Sexual intimacy has value beyond penetration. My body works when conditions support it." This cognitive work gradually shifts your mental framework from one that creates stress to one that creates safety. Step 5 is addressing any chronic stress or life circumstances that are keeping your baseline nervous system activation elevated. Implement stress management practices like meditation, exercise, adequate sleep, time management, setting boundaries, therapy for processing difficult emotions or experiences, and any other interventions that help regulate your nervous system and create more capacity for relaxation and pleasure. Your sexual function will improve as your overall stress levels decrease. Step 5 is considering whether professional support would be helpful. A sex therapist or psychologist who specializes in sexual dysfunction can provide structured guidance, evidence-based techniques, accountability, and support for both you and your partner.
Many men find that working with a professional dramatically accelerates progress because they have expertise in exactly these situations and can tailor approaches to your specific circumstances. Step 7 is gradually reintroducing sexual activity as natural function returns, but maintaining the mindset of pleasure and connection rather than performance. When erections begin occurring reliably during sensate focus or other non-pressured intimacy, you can gradually progress toward intercourse, but always maintaining the attitude of, "This is pleasurable exploration," rather than, "I must perform successfully." If anxiety starts increasing at any stage, step back to earlier stages until you feel comfortable again. Progress is not linear. There will be ups and downs, but the overall trajectory should be positive if you maintain the right approach. Let me walk you through what David's recovery journey might look like when he implements these strategies. David finally understands, after research and possibly talking with a therapist, that his inconsistent sexual performance is primarily performance anxiety, creating stress responses, not physical damage. He feels simultaneously relieved that there's an explanation and anxious about whether he can actually change the pattern. He has an honest, vulnerable conversation with his partner, where he explains what he's learned, acknowledges how the situation has affected both of them, and asks for her support and participation in a structured approach to recovery. She's relieved to finally understand what's been happening and eager to help rather than feeling rejected or confused. They agree to a 4-week period where penetrative sex is completely off the table, removing that pressure. They start with sensate focus exercises, beginning with non-sexual full-body massage and touching sessions twice per week, where the only goal is pleasurable sensation and connection. Initially, David feels some anxiety even during these low-pressure situations because the learned pattern is so strong. But gradually over the first 2 weeks, he finds himself able to relax and focus on the pleasure of touch and connection. He notices that spontaneous arousal sometimes occurs during these sessions, which surprises him because he's not trying to make it happen. When erections occur, they follow the protocol of just noticing them without trying to use them or maintain them, letting them come and go naturally. By week 3, they've progressed to including genital touch in their sensate focus sessions, but still with no goal beyond exploration and pleasure. David finds that with the pressure removed, arousal comes much more easily and naturally. He's practicing being present in his body, attending to pleasurable sensations, staying connected with his partner, rather than monitoring and evaluating his response. By week 4 and beyond, his erectile function has become much more reliable because his nervous system has been retrained to associate sexual situations with safety, pleasure, and connection rather than pressure, evaluation, and threat. They gradually reintroduce intercourse when they both feel ready, but maintaining the playful, pleasure-focused mindset rather than goal-oriented performance mindset. If occasional difficulties still occur, David doesn't catastrophize or panic. He recognizes it as temporary variation, takes pressure off by shifting to other forms of intimacy, and knows that overall his function has dramatically improved. After several months, David's sexual function is essentially back to normal. Erections are reliable, arousal feels natural and effortless, anxiety is minimal or absent, and his confidence has returned, not through forced effort, but as a natural consequence of restored function. The key was understanding that his body wasn't broken. His mind had created a blocking pattern, and the solution was retraining his nervous system rather than trying to force physical performance. This pattern of recovery is absolutely possible for the vast majority of men dealing with psychological sexual dysfunction. The body is capable, the physical equipment works, but the mind must be retrained to allow natural function rather than blocking it. When you stop trying to force performance and instead focus on creating the conditions where arousal can happen naturally, the nervous system resets, the anxiety dissolves, and function returns. Now I have a critical question for you, and I need you to engage honestly in the comments. Do you recognize performance anxiety or mental blocks affecting your sexual function? What specific aspect is most challenging for you? The anxiety itself, communicating with your partner, the feeling that you're not a real man if you have difficulties, past failures that haunt you, or something else? Please share openly, because your comments help me understand what men are struggling with and create more targeted content, and your participation helps other men realize they're not alone. If this video helped you understand that inconsistent sexual performance, despite being physically healthy, is usually a psychological pattern rather than permanent damage, if it gave you a clear approach to removing mental blocks and restoring function, please hit that like button to help other struggling men find this crucial information. Share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because I'll continue creating evidence-based content about sexual psychology, men's health, relationships, and peak performance. Thank you for watching until the end. Your willingness to understand the psychology behind sexual function, rather than just blaming your body, shows maturity and wisdom. Now take action. Have that conversation with your partner. Implement Sensate Focus. Remove the pressure.